Hello, friends. This is Alina Holmquist, Business Manager. I want to provide you some information on our account codes. Here's what we're going to cover. The account code guide has been updated and is available on the Employee Resources webpage. We will cover the sections of the account code guide, so you might want to open it up and follow along. We have 6 funds that we will learn about in the next slide. We are just going to cover the code structure for the general fund, as this is the fund that everyone uses. We have 29-digit account code structure, but don't be intimidated as we're going to go through it all. So we're going to start with section 1. Now I've got the full account code string here, and we're going to go through each segment. If it's underlined, that means that it's defined by the OSPI School District Accounting Manual, and we can't change these pieces that are underlined. So basically those are prescribed. Now we're going to use the green section the most often, and the blue section is only needed if we're doing a code search in the chart of accounts. So in our system, each segment exists. Each of these segments have been built, but sometimes the full account code combination must be strung together so that it can be used. Maybe this is the first time that that combination is being put together, so it doesn't exist yet. As I mentioned, we have 6 funds. All have a 29-digit account code structure. The general fund, or Fund 10, is our largest fund, and that's where we record all the activity for our day-to-day school operations. Now, 20 through 90, those are our smaller funds, but 20 is capital projects. That's where we do major construction projects like building the Stevens Creek Elementary or the LSHS modernization and expansion project that we have going on right now. 30 is our debt service. So that's where we make the payments on the voted bonds. 40 is Associated Student Body, or ASB. There is a section 2 in the account code guide just for these codes. And that's the student-directed extracurricular activity. 70 is our private purpose trust. That's where we have scholarship funds. And then 90 is our transportation vehicle, and that's where we purchase buses. Now, the first couple sections are our expenditure type for E and our GL 530. That's what we have for expenditures. And for revenues, we use type R and GL 960. Now, you don't have to worry about revenues because all the revenue account codes are hard-coded in InTouch, and they just automatically are coded for the item numbers that you pick. Well, we deal with a lot of program codes. The program codes tell us who is paying for the expenditures. It also identifies the funding source. So is this state basic ed? Is it categorical program like state special ed or CTE? It also identifies whether or not it's a federal grant. So is this a CTE Perkins grant or a special ed IDEA grant? Basically, we need to identify the federal programs because there are more compliance requirements. The account code guide also provides the budget authority. So it shows who is responsible for this funding source. There's also a column that identifies the budget with an X, and it's typically just the O1 basic ed program, so that makes this portion a little easier. Now, I do need to highlight that we are no longer using program 7902 block technology. Going forward, any building technology allocations and purchases will be from the Capital Projects Tech Levy, and we'll provide more information about that. So the activity codes in section 4 tell us why. Why are we buying this? It identifies the functions. Is this for our principal? Is this for safety? Is this for health, like for the nurses? Is this for teaching? Like activity 27, is this for professional development, technology, or curriculum? We have an activity expenditures code document
which provides more definitions to help decide the proper activity code to use. Now, 27 teaching has been quite abused, so there's probably a better activity code out there, and definitely call if you need some help interpreting that.
I want to highlight some newer activity codes. We have activity code 31, which is instructional professional development. So those are things like training, and consider using that with program 0166 BEA professional development contractual for certificated staff. We also have activity code 32, instructional technology. These are for computers or other classroom technologies such as projectors or box lights. One thing to be aware of, though, is that we are going to start having building technology allocations and purchases out of the capital projects tech levy. Then there's activity code 33. These are for curriculum, so textbooks, electronic resources, workbooks, and other instructional materials. And this could also include instructional software.
In Account Code Guide Section 5, we also talk about object codes. Now, this tells us what are we buying? The first digit really matters the most, and it's important that if you're picking an object code to just be consistent. This identifies the goods and services, and you want to refer to the definitions on the right side of the code to decide or call for help. So debit transfers and credit transfers, those are really internal charges for trips or catering. The cert salaries and classified salaries, those are for some of our base assignments, but you would be using those to code subs and maybe extra hours on timesheets. And then cert benefits and classified benefits payroll is going to code those out based on the codes that are used for the salaries or the timesheets. Supply is pretty easy to pick. Now, purchase services, that's where you're really going to have to put your thinking cap on to choose. And in supplies, the one thing to note, we do have object code 5619. It's our holding, and that's for budget purposes only. You don't have any expenditures that you'll code there, but we use it to make the bottom line of your building budget correct. 8 for travel is pretty easy. 9 for capital outlay. Now that is if we have assets that we're purchasing with a useful life greater than a year and a greater than or equal to $5,000 per unit, or a theft sensitive item, and you want to refer to section 6 for that, because we've got suggested criteria, and it's always going to be things like computers, printers, cameras, projectors, basically things that we think would grow legs and walk away. And in a capital outlay situation, that's all the costs involved to install and get that asset ready for use. I want to point out that software licenses can be kind of confusing, and you want to use object code 7345 subscriptions when you are purchasing something where you're not rostering students. And then you want to use 7352 other technical services when you're buying software licenses where you are going to be rostering students. And it is pretty easy to get confused between object code 7 purchase services and object code 9 capital outlay. So you really want to evaluate, are you getting an asset for this installation or people coming out doing something? Now, we began the required object code changes back in 1819, and the state and federal requirements, they wanted more detailed and comparable data at the building level. So not only did we get new object codes, but we also got new location codes. Now, these code changes were prescribed by the NCES codes. That's the National Center for Education Statistics. And it really did result in us having less codes and less options with our object codes. And you just want to be careful because we have all these new object codes. The codes that used in the past may not be the right or valid code. Always try to use the correct code. So look through the guidance, try to find the code that relates most to the situation and use that. And then we do have those defined codes, and they're going to be marked with an asterisk in the account code guide. and it's also what you can use in the valid account code tool to see that the combinations are correct. So the account code tool is only going to recognize the asterisks, and where an object code ends in a 0, we have the ability to expand it out. So we could, if it ends in a 0, we could expand it out 1 through 9 for our own customization. But the OSPI does not recognize any of those expanded codes. So here's an example, 5610 for general supplies and materials. It has an asterisk by it. So that's the one you'll find in the accounting, school district accounting manual, and you'll find it in the account code tool. However, we built 5611 for copy paper. Now that's our code, and it basically crosswalks or maps to 5610 and all those other guidance.
Within object codes, we do have some object codes that are obsolete. We're no longer using them. For example, object code 5615, elementary CERT supplies allocation. For preschool and elementary teachers, they're going to be receiving a stipend in September instead. No more reimbursement request forms coming in to process. Also for object code 5618, first continuing contract supplies allocation, eligible teachers are going to be receiving a stipend in September. So no more forms or reimbursements to process for that as well.
Location codes. That's in section 7, and it tells us what location or students are benefiting from this purchase. We use LLL0 for building budgets and LLL1 for district budgets. The state and feds want to know how much we are spending per student. It's important for some of our funding. If we don't code it to a building, the state will allocate it, and we prefer to code costs to locations whenever possible. So originally, we had a 3-digit location code, and that was expanded to 4 digits. And then the state wanted us to use the Cedars enrollment building codes. Well, we weren't familiar with that. We didn't want to get everybody confused. So we decided to use our regular 3-digit or our normal location codes, add a digit, and then just do all the mapping in the background. Now we do have other location codes for admin purposes and for billing purposes that aren't a specific building.
In section 9 of the account code guide, we discuss miscellaneous codes. These are really for limited use. CTE does use it a lot for some of its classes. And then we have some building specific codes. For example, if you have a donation where you want to track the expenditures, you can add a building specific MIS code to see all the expenditures related to that donation. This is not something that we just automatically do. And then of course we created MIS code 8500 for MTSS to track that allocation expenditures in 21-22 and 22-23. Now we are no longer using MIS code 8000 federal COVID-19. Those were our costs above and beyond normal operations. However, OSPI has developed program codes for our use for the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 grants now. We aren't using MIS code 9410 copier and maintenance contracts anymore. With the implementation of GASB 87, a new basically accounting requirement, those are now tracked as principal and interest payments in a different area.
In section 7, we talk about subfund codes. You're not really going to do much with this, but I do want to make you aware of it and let you know why it exists. So the legislature wants to know how we are using our local levy dollars, or the property tax collections that folks vote on. How are those funds being used? So the subfund 0 equals state and 1 equals our local property tax collections. Now all of the revenues are hard-coded in InTouch to add the subfund. Expenditures, you want to continue to use 0. Please do not select the subfund 1 for expenditures. And all of these changes were in 2242 for subfund and the enrichment tracking of revenues and expenditures. In the final phases of all the account code conversions, we also got prescribed account code combinations. So We also had to validate our account code combinations, and there were many errors. We were merging history and inactivating invalid account codes. Now, there are some problems that we're having with activity codes that are used with certain object codes. I want to highlight a couple. So object code 7352, other technical services, and object codes 9734, technical equipment and infrastructure. Most of the time, you must use activity 32, instructional technology, with these. And I've tried to make some notes on the account code guide next to the object code. We also have the valid account code tool posted on our employee resources. So you can go out there and check and see if this is a valid combination, and also might help you pick a valid combination if you're struggling with what account code to use.
I alluded to this earlier, but I do have some accounting changes to share with you. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB, made some changes that you need to be aware of. We had to implement GASB 84 fiduciary activities for our 2021 school year. Basically, it moved InvestEd and scholarship trust funds to ASB charitable funds. So they came out of Fund 70 and into Fund 40. In addition, we don't have any student involvement with these funds. It's the principal or principal's designee that's responsible for the budget and the expenditures. However, the process for the scholarship donations won't change, so that's a good thing. We also had to implement GASB 87 leases. This is for our 21-22 school year, and copier maintenance contracts had to be moved to capital outlay with long-term financing. So the copier maintenance contract expenditures were removed from the building budgets. Those are now administrative costs and codes are done centrally. However, the copier overage is still in the building budgets. We are still developing procedures to capture and record all of the lease arrangements. In addition to GASB 87, we are implementing GASB 96, which is subscription-based information technology arrangements, or SPITA. And that is effective in our 22-23 school year. We need to take software subscriptions, so any kind of software that we are purchasing for over a year or we are likely to renew every year, they need to become capital outlay with long-term financing. So we are still determining any impact on building budgets, and we are still developing procedures to help capture and record the SPITAs.
Remember, we've got the employee resources webpage. You get to it by going to departments, business services, and employee resources. It's got a section for accounting. So it's got the new account code guide out there. There's a PDF version that makes it easy to print, and an Excel version that allows you to cut it down, make some notes, and kind of customize it for your needs. We've also got the activity expenditure codes with the definitions to help you decide what activity code to use, and then the valid account code tool. Like I said, it's you can filter it to check for valid account code combinations. It's also great because it can help you find the right account code. If you know what object code you want to use or program code, you can look to see what options that you have. So appreciate all the work that you do, and I hope you found this to be helpful.